Huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Ruben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to be diving into some Skunk Ape sightings and information. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, and also our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Additionally, you can find us on our Patreon, where you can get ad-free, exclusive early episodes. And if you have any questions, just want to say hi, you can send us an email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. I also just want to say thank you again to everyone. I keep saying this in so many episodes, but genuinely from the bottom of my heart and Ruben's heart, thank you so much for your continued support. This show just keeps on getting in feedback and people chatting with us, and just we can see the numbers. We see people have been tuning in, and it's awesome. Me and Ruben, we love getting together and talking about these things. So knowing that we can share this with you guys, it means the world. But thank you again for your continued support. And on the note of Skunk Ape, just Bigfoot in general, if you haven't tuned into some of our previous episodes, I know Ruben did one like a week or so back, and me and him have done introductions and we've covered other sightings and everything like that. But if you look at our feed, there's a whole variety of other Bigfoot related episodes you can dive into for some more information and sightings. So definitely check that out if you're a new listener. But without further ado, let's get into this. So Skunk Ape sightings. Now, if you know Bigfoot, chances are you're familiar with the familial counterparts from around the planet, whether it's the Yeti, the Yeren, Manx, or Yowie. But in this episode, we're going to look a little bit more into the occurrences of the Skunk Ape of Florida. So, a little backstory on this cryptid. Now, it's an ape-like creature that inhabits the forests and swamp areas of the southeastern United States, specifically in Florida. Now, it's worth noting as well, the height isn't necessarily as tall as the North American counterpart, but some sightings still clock this being pretty much like a whopping 5 to 7 feet tall. That's, taller than your average human, of course, but not as high as your 8 to 9 foot tall Bigfoot, sometimes even higher than that too, broader shoulders and everything. It's usually like more of a lanky, skinnier kind of cryptid on the scale between Bigfoot and the Skunk Ape, but usually covered in like a reddish brown hair. And the most notable thing is the foul odor that's usually attached to it. Now, this is again something that is usually connected with Bigfoot in general, is the stench, the smell, and that's no different here, but I would attribute it to being a much more putrid, foul odor. The Skunk Ape itself, though, has been recorded in sightings since European settlers first landed in the region. So let's get into our first encounter of this episode. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Police officer believes he has come across the best documented evidence to date that there are skunk apes living in the Everglades. And today, he's taking out a trailer to camp out and catch a glimpse of the rumored hairy monster. And this is due to the fact that late Thursday night, more than 10 men with shotguns who were hunting the monsters after 2 apes reportedly terrorized 2 children 9 miles west of Fort Lauderdale on State Road 84. They told the officer there were indeed skunk apes. The rabies control officer who was dispatched by the Florida Highway Patrol said it was something really big, hairy, small eyes with a monkey face, long arms, and gray splotches all over the body. Now, the rumors of an Everglades snowman have been treated widely in local press, sometimes more seriously than others. So when the High Patrol dispatcher received this call, and I quote, "Are there any orangutans missing in the Everglades?" End quote. At 9:30 p.m., she responded, and I quote, "Sir, have you been reading those stories about the skunk ape?" End quote. She later reported that the man was sincere and absolutely terrified. he had claimed that he'd never heard of a skunk ape before and actually asked, what is a skunk ape? And had a very hysterical kind of tone to him. Now, it was also reported that the manager of Kings Manor Estates trailer park had reached out to the highway patrol when the man's young daughter was outside of their house trailer when she screamed. And she couldn't talk, and her brother came out and saw two of them on the patio. He said it was bigger than their daddy. That's what the children had said. And he yelled at the thing, and one took off, and then the other leaped under the brush. Now, officials did track these animals from the scene, but only found indications of what could have been monkey-like animals. Tracks were found farther than 4 or 5 feet apart with knuckle prints interspersed between them. They found deep tracks about 12 to 14 inches long, and the tracks appeared to double back and then disappear. Now, it's the disappearing thing again that's interesting, because usually with Bigfoot, Sasquatch occurrences, there's been many people that will track them and the footprints just stop. And this is kind of where the idea of the quantum Bigfoot can come into play. Again, me and Ruben, we interviewed Ron Moorhead not too long ago, and we got to dive into this kind of concept with him, how these things can just kind of phase in and phase out of our reality. Is this something that could be credited towards that? It just adds to that mystery. Or are these skunk apes different in that regard? Would they just jump up to the brush up top and start climbing the trees and use that as a way to escape? You can kind of envision, again, predator is often attributed to the elusive kind of mirror-like vision that sometimes people say and claim that Bigfoot usually looks like when it's kind of cloaking. But you can also attribute it to the fact that if you see some tracks of a predator on the ground, just not in real life, but in the movie world, they be on the ground for a little bit. You can follow the tracks, as our main characters often do in these movies, and then all of a sudden that's it. The tracks are gone. That's because they make that transition up into the trees, and then they use the trees to be moving from point A to point B. And maybe that's not too far off from how a skunk ape would operate. Again, just perspective, but it's an interesting concept nonetheless. I have here another sighting from 1974, and this one was actually published in the Tampa Tribune. Now, Miami police searched without success and with little enthusiasm yesterday for South Florida's elusive skunk ape. It seems we get one of these wild goose chases every year, said Florida Highway Patrol dispatcher. We saw nothing, but that's par for the course. Now, with the search by troopers, a helicopter and deputies from Broward and Dade counties was conducted before daylight after one motorist said he struck an 8-foot-tall animal that walked erect like a man. And another driver said he spotted a large creature thrashing about under the underbrush on a roadside. Troopers said a check showed damage to the fenders of the auto driven by the man, who said he hit an ape-like creature, but there was no sign of blood, fur, or flesh on the car. So they definitely inquired on this to see what was really going on. I don't blame them. This has been an instance where sometimes you find that hair, and Ruben's definitely much more proficient at explaining this, where the hair will be analyzed off of a vehicle after it's dented, and the hair gets looked at, and it's contaminated with human DNA. And this is where he goes really into it in some previous Bigfoot episodes, where the hair isn't necessarily contaminated with human DNA, but it's just full of something that human DNA that's matchable to ours to a degree. Like there's a bridge that's formed between these two lineages here, and that's again going on a little tangent there. In this case, there was no sign of blood, fur, or flesh on the car, so it was hard to really kind of go off of something like that. It just, for the troopers, it would have looked like, hey, this car was driving along, and it could have hit anything. It could have hit a rock or a tree stump, and then this man's just claiming that it happened to hit an 8-foot-tall animal. The kicker, though, is because it can parallel with this other individual. So the person said he struck it, and then shortly after you have another driver that said, okay, I spotted a large creature thrashing about next to the roadside. Now, if the two individuals are connected somehow and it's one big elaborate hoax, it totally could be. But in this instance, and from the information I had found, I couldn't see an actual connection between these two people. So I'm going to run with that theory for now, that it was a creature that both individuals saw around the same time, but the individuals don't have any relationship with each other. Now, before we continue on, I'm going to jump to a quick ad break and then we'll get back into some more sightings. And we're back. So, the terrain. Now, it's worth noting the landscape of Florida is full of wetland habitats with a high water threshold. Substantial rainfall and mostly a flat geography, the state of Florida has a prominent amount of swamp areas with some reoccurring animal life such as the Florida panther and the American alligator. So those are all forming a pretty good area and landscape for something to hide in. You know, the Everglades alone is a subtropical wetland ecosystem. It spans over 2 million acres across central and southern Florida. And in the 1970s, conservation groups actually started working to protect the area from human development and environmental degradation. There were actually airport, I believe, was going to be constructed nearby, near the Everglades. And again, conservation group slapped that down. Nope, not having it. Going to protect the environment here, which is fantastic. That's great. The thing with that is maybe something else is also a proponent to that. I am often one to be curious as to, I'm sure there are individuals and it's in the government as to why, they love to protect and enforce keeping certain areas of our planet closed off, provincial parks and everything, keep them looking beautiful and authentic and great for the animals and like tourists and all that stuff. It's great. It's fantastic. But are there all these people in government, do they really care about that kind of thing? And I'm sure they do, but I just feel like there's something in the back of my mind telling me that maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on as to why they have these provincial parks in certain kind of designated areas, like protected and stuff. And sure, some of the landscapes, like you can't move a landscape to another area, so naturally you're going to create a provincial park around the area and you're going to market it as such. But what if it's not just the landscape? What if it's because there's something there? And provincial parks are one of the main kickers where people go missing. And I mean, the Everglades, people go missing in the Everglades too. Now, it's definitely full of alligators and you could easily get, knocked off out there. I mean, by all means, it's definitely possible. So as far as I'm concerned, something could definitely thrive out there. Now, not perhaps the 8-foot-tall, massively jacked wild man that we are used to out here in North America, but somewhat smaller and skinnier variant of Bigfoot would most likely thrive. Living in this area for hundreds, thousands of years, the density and reclusiveness of these swamps makes for a perfect homestead to thrive and grow in, especially being able to adapt and understand the terrain and know your way around it. Now, another encounter we have happened in 1974 when a young Dave Shealy was out with his brother when they spotted a skunk ape roughly 100 yards away from them. And it looked like a man, but was completely covered in hair. I'm going to attach a link to the full article here in the description, so you can definitely look into that there. But continuing on March 12th, 2002, at around 2 a.m., two women were traveling out of Pan Am City on Highway 98 when their car broke down. They headed out down the highway toward Destin to get some help when they began to hear a very loud noise, a mix of screaming and moaning. That's when they locked eyes with it, a skunk ape. And I quote, "It just stood there and stared at us," the woman claimed. More cars soon arrived on the highway, and it prompted the creature to move off, slowly back into the woods, end quote. Now, according to the BFRO, Florida has the third highest number of Bigfoot-related sightings in all of the continental U.S., with a total of over 323 confirmed sightings, falling behind California at 437 and Washington State at 653. But other encounters have taken place with these creatures, such as rocks thrown at kayakers, and it's worth mentioning that one of these kayakers actually recalls first hearing sticks breaking and the smell of a musky wet dog before the rocks started being tossed at them. This person even had called out, yelling out, "Hello," which prompted a head-sized rock to actually be tossed at this kayaker. You got to be careful, because I've heard other instances too, when you do that call out and these things get very aggressive and they charge, be very cautious. But being in the water definitely gives that kind of brace period, that distancing, and you better have good upper body strength so you can paddle your way out of there hella fast. But I got one final encounter again for today's episode here, and I quote, "Me and my brother were driving south on Highway 85, about 7 miles south of Crestview at 1:30 a.m. when we spotted what at first we thought was a really big black bear on the side of the road. One of the entries, dated March 2013, reads, "When we looked, we saw a large, upright walking, like a human, black Bigfoot type creature." Now, I just love the comparisons between each sighting. People spaced out by decades reporting the same mannerisms and physical attributes of these things. Coincidence? I think not. I really don't. All these different sightings all seem to have interesting ties, and not just spanning decades in isolated areas, but areas that are spread all across the planet. You have these things that are all different size, different looking eyes, different hair colors, different everything in all different aspects of the world from different cultures, described and portrayed by different cultures, but they all resemble and have the same similar, as I said, mannerisms. The skunk ape is no different. It's lankier, skinnier, and stinkier, but at the end of the day, it seems to just have, to its core, a large similarity to the Bigfoot. And you have to wonder what would happen if these two things encountered each other. Is there a certain disregard between the two as the different variants, or is there something that they would be able to kind of meet in the middle ground, I guess you could say? It's kind of like putting I don't want to say a cat and a dog, maybe a lynx and a cheetah. No, that's not the right one. A lion and a tiger. Put them together and see what would happen, I guess. Something that's kind of very, a little similar. Two big cats, and just kind of watch what would unfold. Again, I'm not saying put them in the arena and have them fight to the death by any means, but it's kind of like an interesting kind of companionship that I would like to see, because you hear stories about Dogman and Bigfoot having this interesting kind of connection or relationship where it's maybe symbiotic, but they're out there together and they're aware of each other. And I'm wondering, how would that work amongst different variants of Bigfoot, different types? Because, as I said before, you got the Yowie, you got the Yeti, you got all these different kinds from all over the different parts of the world. And I think it would be quite fascinating to see them have some sort of interaction. But again, there are so many skunk ape encounters that are unfolding, and people are reporting this stuff online. So it's definitely, by all means, take a look and explore and do some more research on your own accord. I hope that this episode could be a great little segue into being able to learn a little bit more about these and hear what people are talking about from their experiences and encounters, because something's going on out there. And the skunk ape is just one of these variant pieces of the puzzle. So let me know, though, what you think. Send us an email. Send me an email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. I'd love to hear if you have any experiences yourself, any stories, or just if you just want to talk about it. Let me know. And yeah, without further ado, that pretty much wraps up this episode. So you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, and our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And again, that Patreon will get ad-free exclusive early episodes. But that basically does it. So thank you for tuning into this episode. I hope it was able to shed a little bit more light on this other Bigfoot variant. And yeah, if you are residing in the Everglades or Florida area, be very careful, because if the skunk ape doesn't get you, I know that there's some damn big snakes and a lot of alligators out there that will. So again, be careful. And until next time, I'm Taylor, and we'll see you soon. Stay safe, everybody.